Angola has reached a breaking point. What began as a peaceful protest against rising diesel prices has erupted into smoke, violence, and raw defiance. But behind the chaos lies something deeper. A new wave of youth who aren't just protesting fuel, they're challenging an entire system. And they say, this is just the beginning. July 2025. The Angolan government makes a quiet but thunderous announcement. They're removing all subsidies on diesel fuel. Just like that, the price of diesel jumps from 300 to 400 kwanzas per liter, a 30% spike. Overnight, no transition, no warning, no plan for the poor. To an outsider in Europe or America, that might sound like loose change. But in Angola, where every kwanza is stretched between food, transport, and survival, this wasn't just a price hike. It was an insult. For minibus drivers, it meant their daily profit just evaporated. For market traders, it meant transporting goods suddenly became unaffordable. And for millions of working-class Angolans, it meant one terrifying thing. If fuel is unaffordable, life becomes unaffordable. And so the spark was lit. The minibus union strikes. Fares double. Streets shut down. And then, the people rise. What began as a response to diesel prices quickly turned into something much larger. For many, this wasn't just about transportation anymore. It was about survival, dignity, and decades of economic betrayal. For 3 days, the capital city of Luanda echoed with the unified voices of the forgotten. Men and women marched side by side. Teenagers, elders, teachers, vendors, all chanting in anger and desperation, "No more lies. Fuel is life. Where is our oil money?" The crowd swelled. From Luanda to Huambo, Bengala to Cabinda, people spilled into the streets with banners in hand and hope in their hearts. And at first, it was peaceful, a rare moment of unity in a nation fractured by class, history, and inequality. But the peace was not protected. On the third day, the government responded the only way it knew how. Police deployed in full riot gear. What started as a march for justice became a battlefield. By the end, 22 people were confirmed dead. At least 197 were injured. Over 1,200 were arrested in just 6 provinces. This wasn't a protest anymore. It was a war zone. A war between a rising generation demanding change and a regime clinging to a system built on silence. And the youth? They say this was not the climax. They say this was only the beginning. Angola produces an estimated 1.1 million barrels of oil every single day. This output ranks it as the second largest oil producer in sub-Saharan Africa, just behind Nigeria. On the surface, this would suggest a nation poised for economic stability. With such consistent oil production, one might expect robust infrastructure, affordable fuel, and improved living standards. But on the ground, the picture is more complicated. Despite its petroleum wealth, Angola recently removed subsidies on diesel, causing prices to jump from 300 to 400 kwanzas per liter, a move that sparked nationwide protests and raised fresh questions about wealth distribution. Observers point to a widening gap between Angola's oil revenues and the reality facing its citizens. For a country generating billions in crude exports, fuel remains out of reach for many working-class families. Analysts note that everyday costs continue to rise. Inflation is another factor, currently estimated at 22.3% as of mid-2025. Further squeezing household budgets. Food, transport, and rent all continue to climb, outpacing wage growth. Critics argue that while Angola's oil sector generates substantial revenue, the benefits appear heavily concentrated in the hands of foreign operators and elite networks. Much of the oil extraction is managed by international firms from Portugal, Brazil, China, and elsewhere, leading some to describe the setup as profit out, pressure in. The state reportedly retains just 17% of the net oil production, amounting to about 24,000 barrels per day. For context, that's out of over 1.1 million being produced. Observers say this model limits the government's fiscal room to reinvest in public services or shield the population from price shocks, such as the diesel hike that sparked the latest wave of unrest. With rising poverty and visible discontent, many young Angolans are beginning to question the system itself. Not just the price of fuel, but the structure of ownership, the distribution of opportunity, and the role of leadership. As one protester put it bluntly, we produce the oil, but we can't even afford to get to work. The protests may have been triggered by fuel, but to many they represent something far deeper, a reckoning with the disconnect between Angola's natural wealth and the people's lived experience. The question of ownership remains central to Angola's current crisis. While the country produces approximately 1.1 million barrels of oil per day, official figures suggest that only around 24,000 barrels, just over 2%, are retained by the Angolan state. Observers say this limited share leaves Angola heavily dependent on external players for both extraction and export. The majority of the profits, analysts note, are directed toward foreign stakeholders, leaving minimal returns for domestic reinvestment. Data from industry sources shows a heavy presence of expatriates in key sectors. An estimated 260,000 Portuguese nationals, along with 20,000 Brazilians and 20,000 Chinese, are currently working in Angola's oil fields, diamond mines, and large-scale infrastructure projects. Critics argue that this structure, where foreign labor and capital dominate the commanding heights of the economy, has created a system where wealth is generated locally but extracted globally. As one economic analyst put it, it's not that Angola lacks resources, it's that it lacks control over them. Some observers have gone as far as to call this a form of economic neocolonialism, where the outward symbols of independence mask a deeper dependency on international corporations and foreign governments. The concern, according to many Angolans, is not just about profit, but power. Who controls the resources? Who decides how they're used? And who truly benefits? For many young protesters, the answer is clear. The system may have changed names, but the imbalance remains. But something has changed. A new generation of Angolans has risen, and they're not scared. They're organizing protests on WhatsApp, calling out corruption on TikTok, exposing injustice on Twitter. They're angry. But more than that, they're aware, not anymore. What began as a reaction to rising fuel prices has become a rallying cry, a louder, broader movement about something far more personal: dignity, ownership, and the refusal to inherit silence. Across Angola, young people are drawing a line, not just against inflation or foreign dominance or state decisions, but against a generational cycle of waiting, watching, and enduring. A new generation is stepping forward, not to burn it all down, but to reclaim what was supposed to be theirs all along. Not just the oil, not just the land, but the voice to decide what happens next. And this time, they don't plan to be ignored. The people of Angola are sending a message. We are not afraid anymore. Angola is at a crossroads. The old systems are cracking. The silence is ending. And if the youth are right, then what we're witnessing isn't the end. It's the beginning of a fire. This is the African Scoop. Subscribe for more first-hand news on the African content.